building, monument, or piece of art you've only seen in a book or on screen, only to be disappointed by the massive crowds, long waits, and blocked views once you get there. It's a letdown for sure. Global tourist destinations are increasingly crowded, taking much of the enjoyment out of traveling anywhere that's not off the beaten path. As bad as it can be for a visitor, it can be even worse for the residents of major tourist cities like Paris, Amsterdam, Barcelona, or Venice. Cities that once had a balance between tourism and the needs of locals suddenly feel overrun, and locals are beginning to protest against the locust of tourists descending on their hometowns. Tourism can create jobs and boost economies, but it can also turn a city into a theme park. This problem has become more acute as the number of tourists continues to increase. What can be done? How can we strike a balance between locals and visitors while retaining what makes these tourist-friendly cities so special? Before we talk about the solutions that these destination cities can use, we need to get a full account of the problem. What are the major challenges? The most obvious one is the sheer number of tourists. The numbers have been going up. There are way more crowds now than there were before. Why is this happening? International tourism has more than doubled since 1995. Why the growth? There are lots of reasons, and a big one is China. Chinese tourists account for 135 million of those international travelers, and Chinese tourist spending has increased 11-fold in the last 10 years. China's middle class has grown, and they're spreading their plane wings. Travel has increased among citizens of other countries too, and the result is crowds where there once were not. Low-cost airlines are another reason for growth in international tourism. It's called the Southwest effect. A low-cost carrier starts flying to cities with cheap flights. Other carriers lower their prices to compete. All of a sudden, air travel becomes a lot cheaper and people fill all of those seats. The southwest of Europe is Ryanair. They've been aggressive in setting up low-cost routes all over Europe. For example, 1 month after flying into Barcelona, the carrier had set up 23 new routes into the city. So there are more travelers than ever taking advantage of low-cost airfare. Where are all these travelers headed? They're flying all over the place. Asian destinations are growing in popularity, but Europe is still the biggest draw for international tourists. For this reason, this video is going to focus on cities in Europe like Amsterdam, Barcelona, Paris, and Venice. You can see on this chart that they each receive millions of international visitors. They aren't the absolute largest tourist destinations. That honor belongs to huge cities like Hong Kong, Bangkok, London, and Singapore. But the cities of continental Europe have a lot of tourists in comparison to their size, and many of these tourists congregate in small historic districts. So there are a lot more tourists than there were a couple of decades ago. So what if the lines are a little bit longer at the Louvre? There's more to it than that. Tourists can disrupt the day-to-day lives of local residents and transform their neighborhoods. The recent rise in tourism has been mirrored by the recent popularity of home-sharing services like Airbnb. In the past, tourists used to stay almost exclusively in hotels, but now they're staying in apartment buildings, sharing lobbies, elevators, and walls with longtime residents. When tourists get loud and drunk at 3 in the morning, they used to only bother the hotel staff and other tourists, but now they're annoying locals. The problem goes beyond mere nuisance. If an apartment becomes an Airbnb rental, it's not available for residents to rent anymore. This can restrict the housing supply and drive up rents. Entire neighborhoods can be transformed by this effect, as locals are displaced by tourists. In the Gothic quarter of Barcelona, the resident population has declined by 45% in the past 12 years. Tourists have been driving out residents before Airbnb, though. The population of central Venice, the part with all of the canals and history, has been declining rapidly. The remaining citizens of historic Venice staged a funeral for the city when the population dipped below 60,000. This trend towards fewer locals and more tourists affects other land uses too. Shops that cater to locals, like drugstores and tailors, are being replaced by trendy restaurants and souvenir shops. This makes neighborhoods less desirable to locals, who move, opening up new units for Airbnb landlords to transform into short-term rentals, accelerating the neighborhood transition. Okay, I hope you can see the problems cities face when tourism overwhelms the local population. How can cities respond? Well, in a few cases, locals have taken to the streets to demand a slowing of the unchecked growth of mass tourism. Protesters have staged demonstrations in Barcelona and Venice and respond to policies designed to attract more tourists and ignore local concerns. As one protester put it,
Repito, no estamos en contra del turista. El turista que viene aquí se interesa por la cultura, viene a un hotel o va a un hostal, todo perfecto. El que viene a un piso turístico y el que viene a molestar ya se puede ir por donde ha venido porque no lo queremos.
She makes a really good point. Not all tourists are created equal. Cities have begun to realize this and have changed their marketing to try and promote themselves to tourists who stay longer and are more willing to visit other parts of the city or country. Why are long-term tourists preferable? Imagine a hotel room booked for a week. If that hotel room is booked by 7 different couples for one night each, They will all want to visit the most popular attractions, like the Eiffel Tower or the Louvre. Imagine one couple staying 7 nights. They will also visit the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre, but not 7 times. Long-term guests are more likely to visit places off the beaten path and eat at restaurants that don't just cater to tourists. They may see a performance supporting the local art scene. Locals prefer these kind of tourists, and they are certainly better than what are considered the worst kind of visitors, cruise ship passengers. These tourists often stay only for a day or two, but each ship can deliver as many as 6,000 passengers, all of whom invariably head to the most popular destinations. They don't rent a hotel room, and some don't even eat on shore. They inject little into the local economy and make everything more crowded. This year, the Italian government passed a bill that allows Venice to charge visitors who don't stay in the city, cruise ship passengers mainly, $12 to enter Venice. The goal is to raise money to pay for the wear and tear these passengers leave on the city. The entrance fee isn't an ideal solution, as it basically turns Venice into a theme park. In fact, Venice has installed turnstiles so they can turn away visitors once the city fills up. Locals and those staying in Venice hotels have ID cards that allow them to pass through. Barcelona has also taken this approach with one of its most famous attractions, the Park Güell. In 2013, 9 million visitors entered the park, creating mob scenes around the famous Gaudi sculptures. Local authorities installed gates and only allow 800 people per hour to enter the park. They also have to pay a fee for the privilege. This action effectively turned the public park into a theme park. It has reduced crowds, but it took away a public asset. For some cities, the answer might not only be better tourists, but fewer tourists. Amsterdam is taking this approach. The Netherlands Board of Tourism and Conventions, staring down figures showing a 50% increase in tourism by 2030, is no longer actively promoting the country as a destination. Amsterdam halted any new hotel construction in 2016 and cracked down on Airbnb, only allowing a unit to be rented out for 30 nights per year. It has also added an €8 charge for cruise ship passengers. Their policies haven't been entirely consistent, though. Even as everyone acknowledges the drawback of cruise ship passengers, Amsterdam is expanding the size of their cruise terminal. Amsterdam is also refurbishing an airport to allow for more low-cost flights into the city. Countries are also trying to spread out tourists, encouraging them to visit lesser-known attractions or cities in the same region as the major tourist destination. These places, often overlooked, can have the same history and character as the busier sites without all the crowds. When these efforts are too successful, however, they too can become crowded and cause problems for locals. And not everyone goes for this approach, especially in the age of selfies. People want to collect pictures of themselves at famous sites, and it's less about soaking up the culture of a place. On the other hand, the search for authentic experiences while visiting can lead to the commodification of local culture, where a sanitized version of the culture is sold to visitors. But it's not all bad. Tourism can clearly offer benefits to a community in the form of spending and tax revenue, and there's something to be said about visiting other places and learning about new cultures. There really isn't an easy way to strike a balance between the needs of locals and the needs of tourists, but big tourist destinations will keep trying the ideas we just discussed, as trends don't show the tourism boom slowing down anytime soon. When I get the chance to travel, I love visiting